Welcome to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 227 with Jason Treu. The Art of Adventure is a podcast that helps you travel the world, run your business, and embark on an epic quest. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can find the show notes to this episode at derekloudermilk.com. And before we get started, I'd love for you to check out my recent book, Superconductors. It came out in July, and it features our guests today, Jason, in the relationship building chapter. So that's based on his previous interview on the podcast, and he is known as one of the best relationship builders. In fact, the most connected person in Texas, and that is the great state of Texas. So he is really an impressive networker, but he's here today to be talking to us about self-awareness, and that's been really popular with his clients, and he's been really digging into the psychology of self-awareness, how to get it, and why most people don't have it. Most people believe they're self-aware, but only a very small percentage actually are. So that might be me or you. So we're going to talk about how to figure out what are your blind spots and how they're holding you back from success. And this can be a huge competitive advantage because it's not really easy to do and it's not natural, and most people aren't doing it. Jason even goes so far as to say that self-awareness is the number one predictor of success. So without further ado, here is Jason Treu. Welcome back to The Art of Adventure. I'm here again with Jason Treu. Jason, it's been 3 years pretty much since you've been on the show. Welcome back.
Yes, well, I'm glad to be back and have another adventure with you.
And after our recording, we actually ended up meeting in person in Massachusetts for the Elite Man Festival, which was great because I got to observe many of your social skills, your relationship skills that you had talked about in the interview throughout the course of that event. You were including people in conversations. You were buying drinks for people. I totally loved how you backed up everything that you had talked about in terms of creating social wealth by actually getting to see it. So just first I want to start by acknowledging you for that, because I think that's really awesome to see.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And so in the few years since you've been on the show, what's been your main focus with your work? You're an executive coach?
Yes. So I think a lot of it's just working with individuals on teams to help them really maximize their own performance and their innovation while helping them, create the career, their business that they love, and also feel fulfilled in the process. And if you do all that, 80% of that runs over in your personal life, right? So you manage that significantly better just by learning and having interactions that I have with someone else. So I don't focus on that, but I realize that has such a major impact that there's a lot of crossover. Because if things aren't going well at home or in your personal and social life, like, you're going to go into work with all that baggage. It's not like you neatly separate these things in your brain and when you're having conversations and interactions with people. So you have to kind of help someone holistically, even if you don't market like that, right? Or tell people that it's a byproduct.
Yeah. And what types of people are you generally working with?
I think it's really different. It's like in a traditional corporation, it's a director level and above, all the way to, the C-suite and boardroom. And then, I do work with managers in companies too. Usually it's more of like a team environment that I'm working in them with, either some workshop or something else. And then, I also work with entrepreneurs and just, other groups in different capacities, right, to help them on, challenges, blind spots, career paths, helping them grow their business, right? Because an entrepreneur, there's 5,000 things that they may need help with, and it's really about helping it's really solving really where their biggest challenges are, and a lot of it comes down to initially helping them with their blind spots, right? What are they not seeing? Because those are the things that are hurting and holding them back the most. And most people, because their self-awareness is very poor, that they're missing a lot what's going on, right? And they don't think that they are, because they're able to see problems in other people and clearly identify it and come up with solutions, but our brains aren't wired for us to be able to see ourselves that way. But we don't believe that that's true. So that stuff comes up the most when it comes up to people, because usually, like, if someone's telling me in a client situation, well, here are the problems I'm having, they may be directionally right, but they're missing the specifics, right? When they're telling me, right? They might say, hey, my team's not performing well. And I'm like, okay, well, great. That's a broad brushstroke. But the problem is you. And they don't identify that as the problem.
Gotcha. Real quick, before we get too deep, I'm actually curious. You mentioned as we were chatting before the show that you're working with people at Amazon and Google. I'm just curious, I know you have a lot of connections and relationships all around the states and the world. Is that how you get to work with people at those, well-known companies is through your network?
It's a variety of things. Some of it's that, some of it's reaching out to other people, some of it's being on shows like this. You just have to open a doorway, right? I mean, because a lot of the times, and then, I've worked on trying to understand how to build relationships and spread in organizations like that. And I'm actually working on trying to do some things on that. So some of this is just sitting down and coming up with a lot of value. And part of it is coming a lot of value you can give away for free, so people can see what you're doing, especially in a team environment, and then have it spread. So I'm sort of in the beginning stages off my last TED Talk on some team building things that are working really well, and trying to figure out how to navigate inside of large organizations. Because once you get in one pocket and you ask someone, well, hey, can you recommend a few people? And then you can start actually going in and delivering more value. And it's sometimes easier to do for free or next to free, because then it's a lot easier. You don't have to fill out some purchase order and wait. You can just go in. And then if you get some more recommendations, I mean, you can imagine if you spread a few times, and I'm in like the second layer of spreading in a lot of the places I'm in and delivering value, then it becomes exponential, right? And then at some point, you really then start charging more and more for it and have internal referrals, so that it's easier to do things, right? So,
and this is something that I'm curious about. I primarily work with entrepreneurs who are hiring me directly, but is it that the people that you're coaching and working with in these corporations, are they hiring you directly out of their own pocket?
A little bit of both, right? I mean, I think some of it they do, some of it comes out of HR. It really just depends. Obviously, the goal is to come out of the company, because then it's easier to make more money and it's easier to spread, right? And that's why the problem I've had in my business with entrepreneurs, and I actually changed my model, was if I go to an entrepreneur and I'm super successful, like, I don't care how much money I'm making them, the problem comes in referrals, right? Because they have to give me an external referral to someone else that they know, which still is more challenging than an internal referral in a large company.
Because
especially an internal referral they're not paying, right? Like in most instances, or they can do something with some level of a budget that they have. It's just easier to pay. And then you can go to HR or some other mechanism, and people are more likely to listen to you if the people recommending your internal, just because they're part of the company, right? I mean, it just,
interesting.
If that makes sense. Because then it gets easier. Yeah, because then it's a lot easier, because because a lot of my business has been on successful entrepreneurs, but the problem is that my clients in corporate America are way easier for me to navigate. And honestly, there's less noise. I have less competition because people really haven't figured it out, unless they are gotten some recommendation into HR to be some level of a coach that already is doing work inside of there, which usually is not that many, but it doesn't funnel down to the departmental level of then really anyone for the most part. So you can navigate this stuff, I think, a lot better, and it's a lot easier to make money if you can do it internally in organizations like that than it is to try to go one by one externally.
Interesting. I think probably people will find that fascinating, since we have coaches of all types that listen to the show. It's good to have perspective, and some people, especially like if we're dealing with performance, like you are, everyone wants to be high performing, and it can be super valuable within an established organization.
Right, because then if you get the other part of it that's, I think, really in some ways significantly more helpful is, let's say you do group coaching, right? Because someone might be on and saying, well, I have 10 people and I can fill it. And I'm like, great. But if I have an entire team of 10 people that are selling, and that group would increase revenue by 15-20%, I have a significantly larger story to tell than you having 10 people. Because I can look at the impact before and after and tell a story and look at all the metrics, because they granulize it to a very small level, compared against the rest of the teams that they're going against as well, right? I can get, in a lot of instances, I can even get that data, right, to say how much is that sales team doing vis-a-vis all the sales teams in the organization. So there's a lot of really valuable data sitting there for you as a coach that you can market, right? And I don't have all that yet. I'm doing some of it now, but I'm theorizing it because I'm seeing it in a couple of my clients that I have that are in corporate America. And it's just a really interesting premise. And you just see far, far, far less people doing what I'm doing, right? Trying to build in this model. In fact, I don't really know anyone that's doing it. Because I ask people, and they're just, they're like getting in companies through HR, and they're a coach that they get assigned from there. They're not working inside and trying to build it inside of like different business units themselves inside an organization, right? Which is completely different. So I know we're digressing, but it's just.
Yeah, and this whole like thing has me thinking of like you being some sort of like, it has me thinking in biology terms, like we have this like big macroorganism, and then you're like coming inside and like working to change things from the inside, like a symbiotic relationship or something.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a theory that I've come up with on trying to do things, because it seems to me that there's a lot more opportunity to start doing this longer. This is harder, because I have to go one by one to do these things and build momentum. So this is probably more like a multi-year project than it is doing it some other way. But when you hit pay dirt in a place like that, you really then have a significant story to tell that's hard for the larger organization to ignore when you have that many data points. And if you've been successful, they can't just say, well, it doesn't work, right? Because if the numbers work, well, then, they'd be ignorant to not do that. And senior managers at some point will see that and saying, I want whatever that is, because I'd rather have my team be performing 10, 15, 20% better than at neutral, because that means I get a bigger bonus and I'm going to get promoted. So I want that person, right? For self-interest reasons.
Yeah.
Not even if I care about my people, right? Which, right? You have to think like that, because it's all about what's in it for me first, right? Because I don't know if people have a contribution mindset. Right. Right? There's no way to know that, but I know that they have a self-interest because they get an ego.
Yeah. So let's talk about blind spots. That was a term that you brought up in the beginning. What types of blind spots, when we become aware of them, are most helpful to increasing work performance?
Well, I think the biggest problem for people is that, like we talked about before in the beginning, is that most people can see problems in other people really clearly, right? I call them like being Oprah, right? You can see all the problems going on, you can give solutions, but then in your own life, you can't see what's going on. And our brains are wired that way, right? I'm sure people have heard this, reptilian brain has not evolved since caveman days, and we can't see things inside of ourselves because it's fear-based. Because if we saw everything go in our own life, we would freak out.
Okay.
So that's so our brain does not allow us to see all the things that are going on purposefully, and we see things very myopically, and we need other people to point out those challenges, right? The second part of it is that a lot of these challenges and blind spots come from early on in our life, right? We're growing up. We are blank pieces of paper, and our parents, they do the best that they can. At least I come from that point of view, but they have their own challenges, right? And they start to sway and build us, and we model and learn and accept things that are growing up. But a lot of those patterns growing up either don't help us right now, or even if they do service, they're being very destructive overall. So for most people, what happens is their biggest challenges right now today are things that happened when they were either children or some significant trauma going on. And the other data that goes along with this is that there's several studies, but one of them I've read recently is that only 10 to 15% of people are self-aware, right? They did a study with 5,000 managers and senior level people. And I think when you look at people that are in, high levels of self-awareness, now you're talking about very low single digits of people, right? And another data I saw was that 17% of women are self-aware and only 5% of men, which is really, again, I believe that is true, right? Because as I work with men.
How do we know if we're self-aware or not? Because if it's, I might think I'm self-aware, but I'm not actually. Is there any way to tell?
Most people do. 95% of people think that they're self-aware. And the other problem that's even worse on top of it is that they did a study of senior managers, and they found that the more experienced and the more power that they have, the more that they overvalue their own skill set. In fact, they looked at 20 different parameters of leadership, and 19 of the 20 senior managers completely overvalued compared to what other people viewed them as. They were really wrong, not just wrong, way out of the universe wrong. And I think that's a challenge. The problem with I think the only way you become self-aware is if you start to learn and really understand how to identify change and taking a look at what your biggest problems are and how quickly can you adapt, right? Can you take a look at them and find solutions? And typically that means you have outside people that you can either go to or are continually using to help you figure that out. If you're trying to solve it all on your own, I can guarantee you're not self-aware because it's impossible for you to do it.
Gotcha. And so it seems like when people say, okay, I want to look at my blind spots, I want to fix my biggest challenges, one of the biggest hurdles is if someone tells you something you don't like or don't want to hear, isn't it tempting just to be like, okay, well, I can just get by without changing anything?
Totally. People get very defensive, right? It's kind of like a boxer in the middle of the ring. An example would be, most people in corporate America and then other people that are successful too often do what they call 360-degree reviews, right? And most of them are done poorly. But what they do in general is get anecdotal data from interviewing, a handful of people about questions concerning an individual, right? And the problem with that is if they go back and identify, let's say that person was a very poor listener, right? And you got that data from 6 people. Well, if you go back and tell someone that they are a poor listener, you're essentially telling that person they're broken and they need to get fixed and they don't listen well, right? Now, I don't know how many people who get approached like that take it and are like, oh, great, tell me more, right? There are, but they're those are tiny amount of people, right?
Yeah.
What they do is they get defensive. They blame other people. They offload emotions. And again, it's like a boxer in the middle of the ring. You can't corner someone like that, right? Unless you hit with some knockout blow, which again, that's really hard to do consistently if you're doing this overall. So what happens is that even if people are confronted with it and they have to do something, they'll half-heartedly do it and you'll get incremental change. In the background, they'll be really mad or angry at the other people that they know participated in this, because they think that they're underhanded and they are saying negative things about them and don't like them, because how our brain works and how we do. So that's the problem and how people go about this, right? They're dealing in an external world and not really getting to the root cause of what happened in that, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what's your approach? Like, say you do have the data from a 360 and there's some things specific things, blind spots. How do you approach talking about those?
So if it were a case of someone who's a poor listener, right, and I got that data from that, what I would do is instead of confronting them, I would start to ask them, so tell me about how you grew up. Tell me about your family. Tell me, about, how you got love from your parents, how you interacted with your siblings, right? Tell me about the day to day. And I would start asking about questions like, well, tell me how you got hurt, right? Like, how did your parents, value what you were saying? How did you interact at the dinner table? I would start to ask more specific questions around that, especially if I knew that there was a specific challenge, right, that someone was having. Around anything around that, right? Because people will tell me, I'll ask them, okay, tell me about what is your biggest challenges? Because you wouldn't have come to me if everything was going great, right? I mean, I suppose that someday someone's going to come to me like that, but I haven't had them so far, right? And right, I mean, when you look at people who are like sports psychologists, and I've spoken to some very successful people who coached people on this last Olympic team, they're like, we never get people like that, right? I mean, I guess there's so few of them because that's not how people work reaching out for help. So if someone like that, I would ask them, and an answer I got back from a CEO, probably the last 6 months was, I grew up in a family of 6, right? And I asked, well, tell me about around the dinner table and how you got hurt. And he was like, well, one time I remember elbowing my brother and my sister and then talking over them, and my parents heard me. And he gave me several different pieces of, stories that I were asking about how he got hurt by not listening. So immediately at that point, I understood that he got the payoff, that not listening got him what he wanted. And trying to be patient and sitting around got him nothing. So he learned that behavior early on, and it got solidified later in life. And so the problem now with him not listening was the people around him were getting really annoyed and didn't feel heard or valued. And that was costing him a lot of money and success and everything else. And then when you tell someone, you can say to them, look, the pattern you've been doing since a little kid, and this is neither good nor bad because it's something you learned, like looking at data and analytics and putting it together, right? Is that you got this message, not listening, helped you get what you wanted. So now it's not serving you anymore, right? And you have a choice. You can either change your behavior, right, and be happy, fulfilled, and successful, or you can be right and continue on what you want to do. And now you give someone a choice. You're not telling they're broken. You're just telling them that it's a pattern that they did for so long. I throw out unconscious behavior stuff because we have all these thoughts we're unaware of. And, you put in that. Now basically, instead of a boxer in the middle of the ring, you're putting them in the corner. And you're putting them in the corner that they got there because they gave me that data. I didn't make this up, right? They can't say, well, my executive team, they don't get it, right? They're not engaged. That's not what you'll get, because the person starts to think, and any person who wants to do better and is intelligent realizes that, oh my gosh, this is true, right? I really am I'm not listening because it's what I've learned. And the only way for me to get better, because I've been doing it all my life, is to change the habit. And if you position it like that, then they feel okay about it. And then you're saying all you have to do is do some small little simple things, and you'll get an immediate benefit from this. Will be exponential, and it'll change everything around. And wouldn't you rather have that than what's currently going on? And they're like, yes. And then you give them the things, which is like, talking last in meetings, asking more why questions, right? Getting to know some of the people in a little bit more personal level. The simple things, right? And a few other ones which are not hard. These are not like tons of work, or like I got to write in like 5 pieces of paper and ask these questions. It's really not that much. Well, then you get this massive change that goes on, and they get it too. And then you share with them. See, this is the problem. When you're having big issues, you can't get defensive about them, because it's probably some pattern that you've instilled either from childhood or for some trauma or something else that's happened. And then all you have to do is start to change the pattern, and you're going to get massive lift. And sometimes it is a skill problem, right? I'm not going to say it's not, because you're teaching them a skill. Sometimes there is no necessarily underlying pattern that's necessarily going on. But if it's for their biggest challenges, there always is, right? Because they may not know something, right? They just may not be good manager because they're not asking the right questions, and they care and they just don't know. I mean, that can happen too, but not initially. because those blind spots are the things that are causing the biggest problems. Unless you deal with those, you can't get to the rest of the things where they are probably skill-based.
And so do you see that when people, they start changing some of their behaviors, like listening or speaking last at a meeting, that they quickly see results and that sort of motivates them to continue?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because then they get evidence and all of a sudden the people around them are like, wow, and they can, and people around them, right, know that they're trying because they see something pretty radically different that they're doing. So they know they're putting an effort, right? And then that translates to anyone around you that you care and you're taking the feedback and actually doing something with it. So then people give you more latitude and that also helps too, right? So people start working for you even unconsciously. So this gets results pretty fast. In the instance of the CEO, which happens for most people, you start seeing results, over weeks. And then, it may take a little bit of time because you may not have some major event where you're seeing something happen. But you do see this over, next 30, 60, 90 days. You'll see significant evidence that will clearly show you in an ROI, meaning that your team's more engaged, they're selling more, there's more revenue, you're doing more better in your business, people are responding better to you. And that's really where I think the biggest lift just comes from people coming in. And then they understand it and they're like, wow, this is great. Like, I totally get this. I would have never even thought that this was possible, but I'm getting in my own way.
It seems like the greatest sort of productivity gains are coming not from people being more skilled or having faster technology, but if you can get a 20% gain from personal awareness or some skill of practicing changing your behavior or something, it just seems pretty fascinating that it's still like our interpersonal behaviors that are affecting productivity.
Totally. Yeah. And the other problem too is that what I found is that when you have a low self-awareness, right? So when you start to figure this all out, the thing about it is your self-awareness goes up, but the reason that that's really impactful is the fact that it causes your external or social awareness to rise as well, and they're correlated with each other. And the only time when they're not is sometimes there'll be people who have a skill that hide low self-awareness, and an example would be someone who's a really good salesperson, right? They're a great salesperson, but then you put them in a role of like a sales manager and they're horrible. Mm. And not only are they horrible, but when you get them training or help or sit down with them, they can't figure out what to do with that information and make it stick. It's not that they're a poor manager. It's that their self-awareness is low and they can't take that information because they just don't know how to relate to other people because their blind spots and other things that are going on are not allowing them to see other people, right? So you can't have good empathy if you have low self-awareness because you're constantly saying to yourself, I don't get why that person doesn't get it, right? They can't put themselves in their shoes and dig more and ask more questions and try to put their emotions to the side and look at it from their perspective to try to help them in one way or another.
Jason, I'm curious if you go through anything or use anything like a 360 for yourself, or if you've like noticed anything as you've been working with other people, any of your own blind spots, or how sort of you've been able to use what you know to benefit yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've had coaching to do things because I learned this through doing it. So, I learned stuff, for instance, like asking for help was really challenging. I mean, that's one of the first things I learned. And it's still an ongoing struggle, right? I mean, I still struggle with it because when I was growing up, my parents got divorced. My mom is a nurse anesthesiologist, and she worked overnight, 2-3 nights every single week, and was gone during the following day. So when I was, in like 4th grade and beyond, I pretty much had to do everything for myself. So in many ways, essentially, I was all by myself. We didn't have any family friends that were close. I didn't have any family my dad lived 90 minutes away. So I saw him like twice a month on the weekend. So I learned at that point, if asking for help was like dying because I would never get it. There was no rescue and there was no one out there. So when you have to learn that, asking for help is like ridiculously hard because I grew up in a survival mode where I could only count on myself.
Wow.
Right. So then now doing it and asking for help for people is extremely hard, and it still is because it's something I did for so long. And it's like, and I definitely struggle with it. And I've asked for help, and you can only get so far sometimes, where sometimes I go back to the same way. But that also is really hard too. And I'd say the other thing is that because of growing up in a place like that too, in an environment, I was really good at having to reach out to other people because I had no choice, right? I didn't have any siblings either, I'd say. So I was all by myself, right? So I had to be an extrovert because I had to make friends and do stuff because I would be all by myself all the time.
Yeah.
But, right? But the other challenge is because I didn't really necessarily come from someone who was really teaching me a lot of emotions and doing stuff. I let people in really far and farther than most people, but I still had a wall up. But I think it's because my wall was so much farther than an average person that people assumed I really didn't, but I did, right? So I've had to learn how to really break down that wall and just let it not be there in some of my closest relationships with people. And that's been hard too, right? Because again, it feels like death to let that go because of what environment I had to grow up in, things I had to do, right? So if I wouldn't have learned those things over time, right? And I figured that out only from getting help from people and asking those questions and dealing with looking in the accountability mirror. So now when I'm confronted with when someone says something negative to me or feedback, right?
Yeah.
Before I get very defensive. And now I take it and I start asking myself, well, are they someone that really cares about me, right? Is it someone who really does? Are they saying this just lashing out or not? And even if I don't know, I start to ask myself the question, well, if they are or they're not, there could be some truth in this. So I have to start asking myself some hard questions. I might call up some people and ask them, do they think this is true? Only because I don't want them to say, oh, no, you're some great guy. I actually want to know the truth, right? Because it could be a blind spot that's coming up that I'm unable to see. And so the only way is to actually get out there and be accountable to negative feedback that you're getting from other people.
This is fascinating. It's like, just really digging into our own psyches and
totally
becoming experts at ourselves.
Yes. That's where the challenge is, right? I mean, and here's the thing. I've done it with hundreds and hundreds of people, and it's always been the same, right? Every time, no matter how successful someone is or what's going on, whenever you're plateauing, I've realized now that what it's telling you is that you need to wake up. And that your blind spots and your environment and everyone is telling you that something is wrong and you need to deal with it and take massive action and dive completely in and work really hard. And that working really hard is going to take a while for you to see results. So you're on a 6-month, 12-month, a long journey just to start seeing some evidence, not talking about mastering anything, but it's a wake-up call. But most people don't get a wake-up call with that. They just continue, right, to plateau. And the problem with it is when we plateau is the next step after plateauing is falling off the side of a cliff, right, where you hit a rock bottom.
So I guess by having a coach or someone that you can sort of dig into your blind spots is, because what I'm thinking is like maybe we could just eliminate the plateaus and the falling off the cliffs before they happen and just sort of like a continuous progression as long as we're starting early.
That's hard, though, because I think it's hard for people to react that fast. I think you can over time. So I think what you can do over time is plateauing is a sign to get help. And what happens is at some point by plateauing, you're going to, even if you seek out other people, there's still you're going to have to learn new skills. So at some point what happens is you're still going to fall down. You're not going to eliminate the valleys, but what you'll do is the valley might be only 25%. You won't have to hit the ground. So then you can make much more progress because you have a system involved that says, okay, for example, Derek would be like, oh, I'm having a problem doing this. Okay, I need to reach out to a coach or some mentors, right? I need to talk to some colleagues. I need to get some support. I probably need to learn some best practices, some new skills. And then you have a model that you're only going down a little bit, but then you're going to have some massive breakthrough where most people only make incremental progress, right? Because they're having to hit a rock bottom and they're so tired after doing all this stuff, right? You've just only lost a little bit of momentum, and now you can make exponential progress because you're starting to learn when you're plateauing, not when you're starting to fall off the side of the cliff, right? And then you can't catch yourself at that point because it takes too long.
I feel like maybe this happens for people who aren't entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs, it's maybe like an exaggerated, like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing because I've had some success and it feels like things are going along, and then something will come along and be like, hit you and knock you down. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I can continue. And it's just these like roller coaster of highs and lows. And it seems like you're talking about momentum, and there's the whole like the sports analogy, of momentum and progress in a career or some big project. How important is that?
I think a lot, because it's, I've looked back at some times when things are, when you start to get kind of like flat footed, right? And that's when the plateau happens. And I think that's the challenge. And when I talk to and I listen to some people who are really great sports psychologists, it's super hard to stay on a path where you're constantly 100% engaged and pushing, because sometimes you get tired, you need a vacation, something's going on, things are really working, and we tend to plateau. And I think if there's some way to have some level of healthy fear, or if you remember the last time you plateaued and just let things go, what happened, I think you can stay on track much more, because you'll start to look for new answers, right? Because if you have a business and everything's going great for 5 years, the landscape is changing, especially in today's world. So you got to figure out the next thing. You can't sit there and continually do the same business you had. That would work in 1980, not in 2018, right? So yeah. I think we have to constantly be evolving and asking the next questions, and we have to know that when we don't, we are vulnerable. And we're vulnerable for our businesses to get in a bad place. And I think the challenge now is we've never lived in a time where this has been is happening as rapidly as it is, right? Yeah. And so I think it's hard. I think we're not thinking as fast as the times are right now. And I think you have to have some healthy dose of fear that as time goes on, are you doing everything? Are you really as engaged as you need to be? If you were working 60, 70 hours and now you're only working 30 or 40, it's a pretty good indication that at some point, if you don't work more, you can't find the next thing and leverage your business, right? I mean, and that's what happens to a lot of people, right? And the hours are, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but a lot of it's engagement, right? A lot of it's looking for, how can I serve my clients better? Are you really looking for the next hill to climb and helping them? Or are you just resting on old material and reusing it? Yeah. And these are all questions that people have to ask themselves, right? And again, like I said before, you can't sit out there and expect to work like 80 hours for the rest of your life every single week. That's not realistic, right? But you also have to know that if you only working a few hours a week, someone out there is going to be working harder, faster, and something else. And if you're working 10 hours a week and someone's working 50, like at some point they're going to catch up, and you're going to out innovate you, because you have to spend time doing this stuff, right? It doesn't just operate by itself.
It's fascinating. Yeah. This rate of change, one of the skills actually in superconductors that we talk about is being able to learn quickly and adapt. And I think part of that is not having to be right, or not being caught up in, I've figured out how to do this, so I'm set. Because things are always changing around you, then you still have to be constantly updating your skills, your behavior, your awareness.
Completely agree, right? I mean, you got to be doing new things. So for instance, like, one of my clients at Amazon wants to do a podcast with me. And so we're probably going to start doing it somewhat soon. Well, within weeks, start doing a first episode or less than that.
Cool.
And he's excited about doing it, right? So there's a whole nother level I can do stuff with someone else. And the reason that he found me was anecdotally on another podcast. And then I'm starting to work with him and doing stuff, right? Well, I've done a lot of podcasts and I've gotten some clients, but I'm getting more clients now in some bigger organizations that I never got before.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason, I mean, I don't know why all the reasons. Some of it just happens, but this stuff comes full circle, right? And I've also been doing a lot more work and doing some stuff for the last couple years. And now I'm getting a lot more momentum with it. And a lot of it's doing research and committed to trying to help people be better at work, be more fulfilled, right? Doing some other things. So it all comes full circle, but it takes a lot of time, right? And you don't get evidence and results all the time. So I think your point is that curiosity is one of the most undervalued qualities in the world today, right? And if you want to be successful over the long haul and fulfilled, the requirement is for you to consistently be learning on your own personal development and professional development, and that requires you to invest in yourself. And the problem with investing in yourself is the ROI, there's significant lag time, right? Because a lot of the times what you learn from one thing is not necessarily going to give you a payoff. What it may do is it'll get you to do the next thing, right? And the next thing, which then will get you to have some ROI, right? That you can see in your life in some demonstratable way. And that's the problem, I think, with a lot of these things, and especially with the rate of change today, is that you have to do the things now to see a benefit in 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months later. And you can't do it when you're in trouble, because then it's kind of like when someone comes to me and they've lost a job and they say, I want to learn how to network. And I ask them, well, why? And they say, well, because I've lost my job. And I'm like, well, no, you don't want to network. You want to find a job. That's two different things. You don't have time to network. You need to pay off today, right? So I think what you're talking about is something that if you consistently do, you are going to be in a much better place personally and professionally over the long term. It's just there's so few people doing it overall today, right? But I think that's also why you're seeing low self-awareness. You're seeing all these problems people are having. They're not happy. They're not engaged. They're not having real conversations. I mean, all the things that are going on, right, are endemic of not investing in yourself and doing these things. Investing in yourself could be listening to a podcast, reading a book, right? But it's not just
podcast listeners,
right? Right. But it's not just that. It's going to a conference, right? It's going taking an online class. Like, you have to learn in different modalities. You can't just go and do one or two. You've got to do a lot, because each of them teaches you something else that the other one won't, right? So, but if you do all these things, I don't see many people that are consistently investing in themselves and doing this that aren't continually getting to new levels of success, right? And an example, one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, this is a great example, right? I mean, like 10 years ago, she's a shame researcher at the University of Houston. Like, some woman who talked about vulnerability and, your feelings and emotions. And I mean, when I started reading her before The Gifts of Imperfection, she was basically, I'm not saying a joke, but no one really took her seriously. And now I heard her speak last fall with her last book, Rising Strong. And she said that 90% of her speaking engagements are in corporate America. Who would ever think someone, a shame researcher at the University of Houston, would be in corporate boardrooms and speaking to leaders on vulnerability? I mean, you see what I'm saying? But it took a while. It wasn't like she woke up one day doing research and all of a sudden she was doing all this stuff, right? She's been writing books. She's consistently doing research, and she's attacking really hard problems and taking them head on. And then that's enabling her to get a significant different level of success in what she's doing.
Yeah. And I guess, when you put it that way, it's like, I'm just beginning to realize like how much focus and attention she must have put over decades to get where she is. And I love to stop and think sometimes about, people that are really successful. Like, there's so much that you don't see going on.
Yeah, totally. Right. Like, one of my clients here is who, has $1 billion company, I asked him a question. I was like, so tell me about when you first started out this company. And he was telling me, it was like, probably now 20 years ago. Right. And he was in Houston and he was living in a rat trap apartment where he had to use a coat hanger for an antenna. And he was eating at the equivalency of 7-Eleven and getting tacos from 7-Eleven and a large Diet Coke for lunch. And he usually had that for lunch or dinner, but sometimes not. And that was how he had to live for like an entire year of almost not making any money and not doing anything other than that because he couldn't afford anything more, right? And I was like, how many people have asked you about and gotten into depth where they actually heard you talk about tacos and getting like, a Diet Pepsi or Coke from equivalency of 7-Eleven. And he's like, really no one. And I thought to myself, that's the problem. We look at people where they are now, not where they had been. So when you don't understand someone's journey, you don't understand the requirements that success requires of you, right?
And there's a flip side, actually, is that people set their goals based on where they are now and not like this guy, probably didn't know he was going to become a billionaire. So he was like operating from where he was then. But, seeing that people can become hugely successful, well, you can set goals based on your future self's success and skills and influence and all of these things that you don't have yet.
Completely agree. And the thing about it is, it took him 15 years and his company almost went bankrupt once along the way. So he had to basically go back all in again and not know that he was going to make it. And he could have ended up walking away with zero, right? So when you start understanding the story arc, and you heard ask me, so when was the scariest moments you had? Like, how did you first start out on this thing, right? And did he give up a big corporate job in order to go eat, tacos, essentially, right? I mean, where he's eating steak and going out to nice restaurants, and now he couldn't afford that in his wildest dreams, right? So I think it's important to ask these questions if you're an individual and you want to understand, because success leaves clues. I mean, Tony Robbins said that, but I think more than that, when you understand the journey, you can appreciate the fact that, like, if you don't put in the work and you aren't curious and do this stuff, like, you just won't be successful. And I know it's hard because of Facebook and ESPN highlights and all this stuff going on, but none of that's real, right? And that's what you have to understand, is that's not real because you don't understand the backstory. And you got to keep telling yourself that, because it can be really demotivating to see all the people that you consider successful around you, but you don't know their journey. And you also don't know if they're really successful or not. They tell you that they are, but what does that really mean, right? Because it may mean nothing. They may be spending all their money. All that money may be fake. They may be leading a lifestyle that isn't real, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I think when you start to take a look at all this stuff and put it together, I think you can have a life where you're successful and fulfilled. Because again, success it's not only happiness, fulfillment's a way higher level of that. I kind of look at that as more what you should shoot for, because we're never going to be happy all the time. I mean, that's a fleeting state where you'll go in and out of that.
Yeah, brilliant. I think this is a good point to. Well, let me ask you one final thing. If there's anything that we haven't covered yet that you think is important to note about either self-awareness or improved performance for the audience.
I think that everyone that's listening, I mean, you have to really focus on your self-awareness, because it will be the number one predictor of your success. So if you think this is all fake, you can go Google the research and take a look at it. And I think you can just, as well, start to logically look at things. If you can't tell emotions in other people, how are you going to be successful, right? How are you going to be able to work with other people if you don't understand how to collaborate better with them, right? And even if it's a solopreneur, right? You have people you're working with, but you can't do that if you don't know yourself. So this is the place where you have to master. There's not an option for you to have low self-awareness and be successful, because if you do, it will be very fleeting, and you'll be really successful in one thing, but you'll be very unsuccessful in the next, and you won't know why, and you'll blame everyone else, but the problem is really you. because that's the only factor that was the same in both equations, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think you need to take a look at this and spend some time and master this skill set, because again, your personal relationships will suffer without it, because I know mine did, and I didn't understand why. I thought it was other people's fault until I realized that I had to look in the accountability mirror, and like I'm a driver in that as well. I'm at least 50% responsible for what's going on.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a challenge, and if we can take it on, then great success comes to us. So,
yes,
Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing about your own personal journey. Appreciated you talking about your own history and as an example, and also sharing how you work and how you do this research. So I love what you're doing. Really, really appreciate your time on the show today.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on back again.
You are welcome. And I'm sure I'll have you back again sometime. Great episode with Jason. What I love here is that obviously he is an extrovert, and he's been able to channel that into growing his business for a long time. And now that he's digging into this self-awareness, it's clearly something that's going to benefit him to get more of what maybe is an introvert's perspective, to really understand himself, and for him to be able to teach that to his clients obviously is going to be a huge advantage. So hopefully that interview gave you some perspective about how to look at some of the areas for improvement. I know that it's, even when I ask for feedback for things, I don't always want to hear it, but I know that it's going to help me grow. It's going to help me improve in the things that I want. So hopefully you're feeling inspired, a little bit motivated to dig in and take a look at how you can improve self-awareness for yourself, because as adventurers, as leaders, this work is what you get to do to lead the rest of the world forward. So if you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. Tweet at us or message us on Instagram or send us an email and let us know what you learned. And if you haven't already subscribed to The Art of Adventure in iTunes, that's the best place to do it. It only takes a few minutes to go over there, hit subscribe, and if you want to leave a rating and review, that's amazing. That helps keep the show up in the rankings to help more people discover this content. So thank you so much for listening. That's all for today's episode. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.